invasions that these Indo-European tribes have done to various parts. Remember, most of the area suffers from a widespread drought, and so those tribes are forced to move into these areas in search of, food and resources and whatnot. The first one we looked at was the Hyksos. They invaded Egypt, were there for about 100 years, and then they were expelled by the Egyptians. We then looked at the Amorites, who are also known as the Babylonians, because they established the city of Babylon. They settled in Mesopotamia, mixed with the local population, adopted a lot of their customs and their traditions, specifically their writing and their stories and all of that stuff, okay? And from this area, we get, the most famous of these kings is a man named Hammurabi, who, of course, establishes one of the first comprehensive, legal behavior, punishment codes type of thing. Last class, we looked at the Hittites. This was another group. They invaded the area known as Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, okay? And the changes that they made there, of course, throughout history, they were usually in direct competition with Egypt. We should do this because the Hyksos were eliminated, unlike in some of the other areas where they were absorbed into the society. And so the Hittites became known as good negotiators and treaty makers because obviously they were more interested in making money than in fighting wars. Okay, now we're going to look at India today, but one of the things I kind of want you to keep an eye on, because in all these cases, all right, number one, whatever language was spoken was typically mixed with the Indo-European language of that particular tribe, which is why a lot of ancient and modern languages have certain very basic words that are common to a lot of language groups. Okay. Number two, they brought with them a culture of horses and chariots, which is probably the main reason why they were able to defeat these areas and conquer them, is because these areas did not have that. Remember, the Egyptians are the exception because they were able to take that horse and chariot culture and turn it around on the Hyksos, and of course, they began to act, in a very conquest-like manner, right? And probably the most important things is that once these tribes settled the areas, with the exception of Egypt, we see then that these two cultures mix and become a completely new society, okay? So today we're going to look at India, all right? Now, the group that went there was a group known as the Aryans, okay? That was the name of that particular tribe. Now, just as an FYI, okay, today the word Aryan is typically used to mean tall, blonde-headed, blue-eyed. Hitler kind of took the word and made it to define that, type of person, okay? But in ancient times, it was just the name of one of the Indo-European tribes, specifically the one that settled in India. They also settled in Iran, okay? And we won't really talk about that until the next chapter. But the name Iran literally means land of the Aryans. Okay, so some of them settled in Iran, but most of them went to India. Okay, now the name Aryan, okay, literally means respected ones. Okay, and like most other Indo-European tribes, obviously they were nomadic. They had their herds. They had, whatever animals that they herded, and of course they were known for their fearsomeness as warriors because they rode on horseback. They fought on horseback. And of course, they used chariots, okay, just like the other tribes. So they basically conquered India the same way the other groups conquered their respective areas. And as I mentioned once again, their language influence, probably the biggest thing, okay, that affects the various areas. And then, of course, just like with Mesopotamia, they do take a lot of the already native elements, which is why, going back, a couple weeks to one of the original questions from, oh my gosh, I almost called you Amelia, but you're not Amelia. Mahalia, how do we still know how to read cuneiform? How can we still try? Well, because these groups kept absorbing and taking that written language and then adapting it to their own. There we go. All right, ow. And so basically just a better map of what I drew over there. All right, you do have the Indo-European homeland, and then of course the spread of the various tribes into these areas and how they eventually influence. Okay, the yellow area is just meant to show, even though in some areas they didn't actually reach, their influence was still felt because obviously the groups that they conquered, kept on going, hundreds of years later. Okay, and so Aryans move into India. Okay, they, just like I said in the other areas, they conquer the area, they settle, and they begin to mix with the local people. Now, the period of time when the Aryans, now remember, this doesn't just happen overnight, it happens over several generations, okay? It becomes known as the Vedic period, or we refer to it as Vedic India, okay? Why do we call it that? Because, Aryans move in, they, take over the area. They take whatever is local, mix it with theirs, okay? And so after a period of time, they do establish themselves within the religious structure. And we'll talk about that just a little bit in this chapter, but a lot more in the next chapter, okay? And so many of the writings have to do with religious themes, and they are known as the Vedas. Okay, so these are religious writings, okay, of this mix of Indian and Aryan peoples. Okay, from here on out, I'll probably just call them Vedic peoples. All right, because that is the period they are the rulers. Now, what do we know? Now, basically, all the knowledge we have about this period comes from the Vedas, comes from these sacred holy writings. Okay, now just because they're sacred, whatever, doesn't mean that they don't talk about a bunch of other things. And so, number one, in these writings, they do talk a lot about their love of wine and music. Okay, so when it was festival time, there was dancing, there was drinking, okay, all the various ways that, I guess we have parties, all right. They were patriarchal, okay. What do we mean by patriarchal? Who is at the head or who is in charge of, let's say, a family? The father, okay? Not just a man, okay? Because, yes, it does revolve around men, but specifically the fathers, okay? So what does that mean? Even if we have, we have two guys right here, they're like in their 40s, they have their own families that they, are responsible for. But if dad comes along who's 80 and he still tells his 40-something-year-old sons, hey, this is what you need to do, guess what? They're doing it, okay? It's not like, I mind your own business, I got my own family, I got my own job, I know how to take care of my, no. It's still dad's call, okay? Because despite, how old you are, all right, you still defer to your father, okay? And so, yes, now, of course, obviously to be a father, you have to be a man. So, yes, it's still a male-centric thing, okay? But if you happen to be the youngest brother, I mean, you still answer to not only your father, but your older brother to a certain degree, okay? Huh?
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, right, you're gonna, oops, pushed it too hard. Sorry about that. You're gonna get sick of me. What does polytheistic mean?
Many gods.
They believed in many gods. Okay, so sometimes I'll call them poems, sometimes I'll call them hymns. Various poems talk about the various different gods and their attributes and stories about them and whatnot. Okay, we know that they sacrificed animals to the gods. Okay, now from other tribes, from other groups, we can kind of assume it just because we have found altars, we have found remnants, whatever, but it's in India, it's in Vedic India that they literally mention, all right, the gods require an animal sacrifice, okay? So with them, we're 100% sure, all right, that they, would take an animal, kill it, burn it, and offer it to the gods, okay? They believed in life after death. All right, which remember, as I mentioned, wasn't a universal common belief. We know that the Egyptians believed in it because, not so much because they talked about it, but what did they leave behind? Big triangles. Yes, thank you. I was going to say, what are those big ash triangles in the desert? Pyramids. All right, and so we know that they put people in there with their possessions, with all of their stuff, because they were going to need it in the next life. Okay? Now, in India, while they believed they didn't necessarily believe in an afterlife. They believed in life after death. Okay? We will talk more about it in the next chapter, but in India, they believed in a concept called the transmigration of souls. In simple English, reincarnation. All right? So you die, okay? Sorry, Corey. And then you reincarnate in a new body, in a new life, in a new whatever. Okay, so obviously, all of your things from this life you don't need because you're in a completely different life. All right, so it wasn't, like I said, in the way the Egyptians and the way even most of us in whatever religious tradition we're raised in. Okay, in this case, you took on a completely new life. All right, but your soul, all right, transferred into that. Okay. They obviously, because they were conquerors, they glorified, competition and warfare and being strong and all of that. And of course, when they weren't out conquering, you need something similar in your life. And so competitions, gambling, games, all of this other stuff, we can trace back the origins of things like chess and dice, especially chess, because that does require, kind of putting that warfare mentality into this game, all right, to see who is better, who is smarter, okay? So, like I said, all right, just to summarize, they conquered the local people, they mixed with them, okay, so they gave them, language, they gave them, the horse culture, etc., and of course, they absorbed, the local traditions, just like we see in some of these other areas. Now, unlike in Egypt, they did conquer everything. Obviously, they were overthrown. The Amorites conquered the entire area, okay, took over all of Mesopotamia. The Hittites took over all of Turkey. But in India, it was different because it was so big, so large, that the Aryans never united, okay? They each established little kingdoms on their own. Most of them were based on family ties, on kinship, okay? So certain clans ruled over certain areas, Okay, so and this is the one thing about India throughout history up until the British conquer them. They were never truly united. Okay, the British kind of forced them to come together, but we do have many small kingdoms, and typically the rulers of these kingdoms were known as rajas. Okay, so they shared the same culture, they shared similar languages, they shared the same religious beliefs, but they were all individual little kingdoms. All right, so unlike these other tribes, they didn't come together. All right. Questions, comments on India? Because believe it or not, we're going to move on. All right, that's it. Like I said, next chapter we'll delve much deeper into their beliefs. Okay? So let's look at China then. Okay? Now, even though China is included in this, they weren't actually affected by, all right, the Indo-European tribes. So, you know, we're just going to, I'm going to leave these guys up, but I'm going to erase that. Okay, and so China developed a lot of its things kind of independently. Okay, and so during the time that all this is happening, all right, in China we enter what is called the Shang period. All right, a man by the name of Tang. All right, around 1600 BCE, he takes over. All right, he's able to overthrow the Xia ruler. All right, the Xia were the family that were, you know, in charge at the time. All right, and he takes over, and so his family, the Shang family, okay, takes over this part of China. Okay, now we skipped over a couple of groups that had, you know, because if you recall, China developed along two different areas, and then, you know, one area was prosperous, one area really wasn't. Okay, China was isolated, and the reason why the difference is in prosperity is because one of them settled next to the nice, calm river that allowed them to grow, all right, whereas one settled along the river that even today humans have a hard time controlling and just destroys everything. Okay, and so we skipped over a couple of groups because, you know, we want to get to the stuff that we think of more now when we think of China. And so it is during the Shang period, okay, that number one, we see the introduction of the idea of ancestor worship. Okay, now, not all Asian cultures, you know, subscribe to this, but it is one of the beliefs in some Asian groups that yeah, you pray to your ancestors, you ask them for advice. Okay, who better to guide you than your dead great grandfather? You know, they're the ones that have a vested interest in your future, not some, you know, random whatever up in the sky. Sorry, I almost said saint, but I know not everyone's Catholic. All right, but yeah, you know, it's your ancestors that are gonna watch over you. Okay, now during the Shang period, number one, there was no central capital because the Shang believed that they needed to be in touch with the people. They needed to be like right there to know what the people wanted and needed. Okay, at least that's what they told the people. All right, what advantage is there if the government's always moving and in your area? They're going to be able to keep an eye on you? Yeah, okay? That was the purpose behind that, okay? We know that by this point in time, okay, copper and tin were discovered in northern China, and even though China had limited contact with other groups, they eventually did get the recipe for bronze. Okay, if you recall, and I am going to ask you this, all right, copper plus tin equals what? Okay, bronze, all right, so they do eventually get, I like to call it the recipe, all right, for how to make bronze, and lo and behold, they discover both in northern China, and so in addition, they also get, you know, like ideas because of, you know, just random contacts with the outside world. And so most of the things that they make, whether they be chariots, weapons, art, statues, whatever, is made out of bronze. Okay? Now, when it came to agriculture, all right, and some other contributions, okay, obviously, and the formula is continually true, okay, more food equals more people. More people equals more food, all right, and the cycle just kind of, at some point it does taper off, all right, or you get some environmental factor that slows it down, but that's typically the way it goes, okay? When it came to China during this time, though, all right, they begin to develop silkworms. Now, obviously, this isn't like you plant a worm in the ground and it grows, okay? They domesticate the silkworm. What do we get from silkworms? Silk, yes. The Chinese realize that, you know, if we you know, control these and we grow them and we feed them and whatnot, they will spin this thing that we can make into what? What is silk used for? Clothing, yes. So similar to India, okay, where they're the first group to grow cotton. They grow a crop that is not meant to be eaten. It's meant to be used for, you know, clothing, for comfort. The Chinese do this as well, but with silkworms, okay? Because once again, you know, animal skins, wool, leather, whatever, you know, depending on your climate, depending on the weather, it could be itchy, uncomfortable, sticky, wet, gross, all right? And so silk, you know, is soft and smooth and is generally considered a bit more luxurious, okay? So, yeah, number one. Number two, it is during the Shang Dynasty that the Chinese come up with a lunar calendar, okay? Now, the Mesopotamians had already done this thousands of years before, okay? But let me take a step back. How long is a lunar month? Because it's all based on the cycles of the moon. How long does it take the moon to do one whole rotation through all of its phases? 28 days, okay? Now, the Chinese, the ancient Chinese, were the first to figure out how long, because believe it or not, they understood the concept of a year, like, you know, the sun, the earth, the sun, all of that. They figured out that they could make a year-long calendar, and they calculated it at about 360 days. Were they right? How long is an actual year? 365. They were pretty damn close. They were off by 5 days. And they existed like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Okay, which is pretty impressive.
Do you know how they calculated it?
Just the motions of the stars and like where the sun appeared at different parts of the sky. They realized, hey, it's been almost 360 days since that was right there. Which, yeah, I mean, that's how ancient people figured it out, by looking at celestial bodies, okay? So they were only off by 5 days, okay? And now, if you have lunar months, which just FYI, just over the weekend we started, people call it the Chinese New Year. I kind of don't like that because it's not just the Chinese that go by this, it's like a lot of other Asian cultures. So the more appropriate term is the Lunar New Year, okay? But if you want to call it Chinese New Year, that's fine. All right. I know, like, my Vietnamese friends just call it Tet, even though, like, nobody else calls it that. So we can go with Tet also. All right. They did realize that 28 days, 28 days, 28 days doesn't add up to 360. Okay? So what they did, okay, this is kind of because, you know, we do 365, 365, 365, but we're still a little off. Okay? So typically, what do we do to correct that? Yes, and we just so happen to be in one this year. Okay, on February 28th, you're going to go to bed and you're still going to wake up in February. Whereas normally you'd wake up in March. We're going to have an extra day this, I know, right? Right when you get Santos for this, you get an extra day with me. All right, so you get an extra day. Well, the Chinese came up with another formula. It's just throwing a whole leap month. All right, so I would hate to be, December 31st, Happy New, oh, fuck, it's leap year. No, we got a whole nother month to go before the year ends. All right, so they would throw in a leap month every couple years to balance everything out. Okay, and so the fact that they did that, and just by observing the skies, okay, is pretty amazing. All right. Now they could also predict solar and lunar eclipses. Okay. Now that takes a little bit more. You gotta use math and calculate certain things, and so we can guess that they kept records of certain events because most of these events happen on a cycle. All right. And so all right. Now, as far as it came to society, okay, we already know that they practiced ancestor worship. So when it came to your grandparents, great-grandparents, if they were still alive, they were respected, they were honored, their advice was seen as like, the last word and stuff. Okay, typically, and just like today in many cultures, many generations live together. Okay, now, one of the things that is still kind of true in Chinese culture is that women married into a family line. Okay, what do we mean by that? All right, if you're a young lady, okay, you get married, and basically you are expected to completely abandon your family because now you became a part of your husband's group. Okay, so that when your husband's parents were old and needed help, it was the wife that took care of the husband's family, the husband's parents. Okay, well, what about her parents? Too bad. You better hope. Sorry, you're a couple. Yeah, I'm like, let's just hope that you have a son who marries someone. And then your daughter-in-law takes care of you guys, okay? Because the daughter that you had, she's gone, all right? She's taking care of husband's family, all right? Which is why, if you fast forward to the 20th century, for the longest time, the Chinese government only allowed people to have one child because, overpopulation, let's keep things under control. And if that child was a boy, yay, because he's going to get married, and now we're going to have someone to take care of us when we're old and sick. If you have a girl, though, it's like nobody's going to watch out. So that's why they were either allowed to try again, like let's have another child, all right, or in some cases, girl babies were abandoned into orphanages, and it's like, oh no, we've never had a kid, and they'd keep trying to have a son, all right, type of thing, and all of that started thousands of years ago with that idea, okay? Now, not the same way that the Egyptians did it, but if you were royalty, all right, you were allowed to take your stuff with you, okay? Because, why should my kid have it, all right? I'm the one that made it, all right? So it's coming with me. In addition, oftentimes, this included things like servants and pets, all right? So if you were the servant of one of the royal family or one of the leaders, then yes, you belonged to the king. And so, I love my servant Jose, so he would be killed and buried along with me. Yes, that's right. Okay. Now, Shang China was basically a theocracy. Okay. Once again, and I know you all have already defined this for me, but what is a theocracy, Mahaley?
Based off religion, right?
Yes, all the laws and the rules come from religious ideas. Okay, not necessarily if it's right or wrong, all right, but, this is what God says, so we have to do it, okay? Now, one of the things that we've discovered from the remnants of Shang China is a concept of oracle bones, because even though there was no quote-unquote God or gods in this Chinese culture, there was like the will of the universe type of thing, you know, the creation force that we talked about with the creation narratives. And of course, remember when your great-great-great-great-grandpa died, all right, you still prayed to him, you honored him, you worshiped him. Okay? So, if you need the help of your ancestors who are dead to guide your life, okay, how are you going to communicate with them? Well, it was with the oracle bones. Okay? Oracle bones were literally pieces of bone, whether it was human or animal, okay, it didn't matter, okay. Each of these bones had some kind of symbol or some kind of carving or some kind of something on it, and you would ask your ancestors a question, you would pray, and then you would drop the bones, and whatever came up, that was the answer from your dead great-great-great-great-grandpa. All right? Not to offend anyone, but I like to think of it as, bless you, a very early magic 8-ball, if you've ever played with those. Are you guys too young for that? You know what a magic 8-ball is? You guys are okay. So, you know, you shake it. It's literally an 8-ball. You shake it and you ask it a question. And there's like literally only like 6 printed answers, you know. I think not. Or the possibilities are there. Or, you know, ask again later. All right? That's what they would do. They would ask their ancestors a question, drop the bones, and whatever came up, oh, this is what Grandpa wants me to do. All right? And so they took that then as counsel from, you know, the beyond. And it wasn't just, you know, the average person who would ask, like, should I eat, you know, steak or chicken tonight? All right, well, great-grandpa's going to tell me. But the kings and the rulers would ask for advice on how to rule the kingdom and get their answers via the oracle bones. Okay? Now, there was no priesthood because there isn't like an organized religion type of thing. But let's say you don't understand the message. And like, okay, I got these like symbols that came up and they're totally contradictory. So you could go to a diviner or a scribe, someone who could interpret, thank you, the symbols, all right, and say, well, yes, I know these symbols are opposite, but that must mean that you're going to come together somewhere in the middle, all right? You need to compromise between, you know, so you had someone who could interpret, you know, a confusing message, all right? In addition to ancestors, when a ruler died, the rulers were also believed to be, okay, I'm going to pray to George Washington, all right, ruler of the U.S., died 200 years ago, for advice on how to do whatever, okay? So this was then the form of worship. Now, the problem with this, at least for us, as, you know, fast forward to 2024, is that most of the writings that we find from Shang China are just oracle bones and oracle bone remnants, okay? So, we don't know what you're going to be my average person from Shang China. We have no idea what the average person lived through or experienced other than something religious, okay? Because religious writings are the only things that are left besides, you know, the royalty, because typically that was written down, because obviously you're going to want to know what the kings did and who they were and what happened. But the average person, who cares? All right? But we do know that the average person would use oracle bones to receive guidance. So well, it looks like they would ask questions about this stuff, and then this are the type of answers. So we know that they did certain things based on what they got. Okay? But beyond that, we're not 100% sure. Just to end this part, this is the map of what Shang China would look like, or the area that they ruled over. So if you recall, society starts in the south and in the north, and over the hundreds and the thousands of years, they eventually unite into one group, and then that group begins to take over a lot of other areas. Now, once again, China as we know it, it still goes up and all the way around and all, much further down and all of that. So it's still not like the entire thing. Questions or comments on China, oracle bones, whatever? Okay, to finish off the chapter, we're going to look at what your textbook calls micro-societies. Okay, what do we mean by micro-societies? Okay, well, these are groups, and obviously they weren't touched by these Indo-European migrations. These are little groups that, for whatever reason, developed in a way that isolated them from other groups. But unlike China, which eventually grew and grew and grew, these societies remained small for any number of reasons, okay? And so not only were they small, but they had limited contact with other groups, okay? So first we're going to talk about the various islands in the South Pacific. Now, with this, it's fairly clear why they developed as a micro-society. Number one, these islands are small, so it's like you can only grow to a certain extent. And number two, the islands are pretty far apart from each other, okay? Maybe today we can take, a jet to New Zealand and then a boat to Fiji and we're there, okay? But remember, we're talking about thousands of years ago, not quite that easy, despite what Moana, did, or her father, or, the Maori gods. All right, they were pretty far apart, they were pretty isolated. And so we believe that anywhere from the year 2000 BCE till about 1200, different groups of people that originated in southern China began to, and in this case, when we talk about double outrigger, it was literally two canoes tied together, okay, with just a living area in the middle, that, they found that to be the most efficient way of being able to travel in the ocean without getting drowned or tipped over or whatever. And so they began to explore, all right? It takes them anywhere from, what are we looking at? See if I can do math here. Anywhere from, 2,400 years to about 1,800 years. By 400 CE, most of the islands, including Hawaii in the South Pacific, had been settled, all right? So it's not like it had one group leaves and next thing you know, the islands are done, all right? It took over 2,000 years for the people to migrate, okay? Now, the islands all share a tropical climate, so obviously the growing season is every day. All right, most of the islands in the South Pacific are actually volcanic, and so the volcanic ash is already rich in nutrients, so you don't need a major granted you're surrounded by water, but that's salt water is the best at growing, but the islands are full of volcanic ash, so definitely the growing season is all the time, all right, and they get a lot of rain, so they can capture, rainwater to use for drinking. They would supplement their diet, obviously, since they're surrounded by the ocean, with fish and shellfish and whatever else they could catch, okay? Eventually, they begin to, and we call these people Polynesian, all right? You do have to know this. The word Polynesian means belonging to many islands, all right? That's all it means. They're the people from the islands, the people who come from the islands, all right? They belong to the islands. All right, but even though we classify most people from this area as Polynesian, all right, these islands are isolated from each other, and so they don't share a lot in common. All right, map from your book. Excuse me, that shows the migration route. All right. And then the colored arrows are basically the years. And so, they leave southern China, Philippines, the different, Indonesian islands. From there, they go into what we call Micronesia. They keep on heading south, and so places like Fiji, Samoa, all right, Tahiti. Eventually, by the year 400, they reach Easter Island, which is where, where the big heads are. All right, and then of course they do make it to Hawaii as well. Okay. The next micro-society, okay, is the Aegean. Remember, when we talk about the Aegean, we are actually referring to Greece, okay? Because, I promise I'll come back, this is the Aegean, okay? And while mainland Greece is, part of, the European area, most of Greece is nothing but islands, okay? And so the people were pretty isolated. They were pretty spread apart. And even in mainland Greece, there was mountains, the land was pretty rocky, so most of the cities developed in isolation, okay? There's actually two micro-societies that developed. The first one, we've already kind of mentioned it in the last chapter. We see a society established on the island of Crete, okay? Most people, when they think of, well, let me back up. They were known as the Minoans, okay? Now, I should have put this up here. I apologize. The reason why we call them the Minoans is after their first king, King Minos, okay? And so the society just took his name. Most people, what they know about the Minoans, once again, their capital city was the city of Knossos, and according to legend, in the middle of the city was a labyrinth. If you were evil, or if you were imprisoned, or if you were going to be punished, you would be dropped off in the middle of the labyrinth, and you were supposed to try to escape. The problem is that in the labyrinth was a minotaur. Someone here told me last time, what is a minotaur? Half man, half bull. Okay, so yeah, you got to get past this man bull. And if you were able, and of course the labyrinth was pretty twisted and had all kinds of dead ends and traps and, and a man bull, okay? Now, on the mainland part of Greece, you had the Mycenaeans, okay? The Mycenaeans are from the city of Mycenae, okay? Hence their name, okay? But beyond that, it isn't until thousands of years later that we actually see the rise of what we consider, classical Greek society. And even then, the different Greek areas, the different Greek cities developed independent of each other, okay? Because like I said, most of this area is island. There are no major rivers like the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, okay? And of course, most of the cities were separated by different hills, mountains, and treacherous terrain, okay? We do know, though, that despite all of this, they did trade with each other. They did have communication, they just never united, okay? With the exception of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. Now, eventually the Minoans are destroyed, okay? Some archaeologists believe that the destruction of Crete is basically what people would think of when they talk about Atlantis and how Atlantis was swallowed up by the ocean, because we do know that during this time there was an earthquake and it caused a tsunami, and the tsunami basically enveloped the island of Crete. And so people are like, oh shit, it's gone. Or it really wasn't gone, it was just destroyed by a huge ass tidal wave. All right, but people were like, it's gone. And then, when the society tried to rebuild, the Mycenaeans eventually conquered Crete. Okay, now, the Mycenaeans, on the other hand, they were very, very warlike. Okay, they developed weapons, they developed, chariots, they developed all of this stuff, probably taking the knowledge from groups like the Hittites, who were Turkey and Greece are right next to each other, and absorbing that technology. If you recall, one of the cities in Turkey, in Anatolia, was the city of Troy, okay, one of the major players in the Trojan War, Okay, well, the city of Mycenae was the one that led the Greek forces. Okay, so we know that the war happened between Mycenae and Troy. Once again, all of the extra, like, fantastical elements, like the gods and the jealous Aphrodite and the golden apple and, you know, Achilles and the arrow, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, then read Greek mythology. All of that was added later. All of that was like the fantastical element. But there was a war between Mycenae and Troy, and Mycenae won. Okay? And so, yes, all right, we do know that the Mycenaeans were aggressive. They were warlike. We have found colony. We know that they conquered Troy. We know that they conquered Crete. We've also found Mycenaean colonies, the remnants of them, in Italy and Sicily, you know, specifically in that little boot area type of thing. All right, so we do have evidence that they had spread out, but eventually they were taken over by another group, which we will talk about in the next chapter. Okay, now, before you run away, I mean, we still have a few minutes, and you're getting out early. Your test is on Friday, okay? Those of you that are new to my history classes, I always do a review session. So on Wednesday, I am going to have a review sheet, okay, that I'm going to pass out, and we're going to go through each of the things that you should know for the exam, all right? I will try to post it like either tonight or tomorrow on Brightspace, so I know there's some of you that like want to get a head start. If you want to, you'll be able to. Otherwise, I will see you Wednesday for the review session, okay? All right, guys, have a good one.